Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healthy Living live stream. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. I am very excited this week to be talking about law and the title of today's presentation, and it will be a top 5 countdown of the top 5 misconceptions, myths, errors that are commonly taught or talked about within the sovereign law, common law, alternative law, natural law movement, whatever you want to refer it to. So I think this will be very educational and clear up some of these misconceptions and help you do things the right way and have accurate, truthful understanding. Along those lines, let me just announce or remind people that already know that this Saturday I will be giving a workshop entitled "It's Not Your Duty to Pay." And this will be a discussion of some fundamental issues because I'm going to show you what your actual role is in the legal system and in business or commerce so that you can have the right reference point and do all your processes correctly. But also, I'm going to explain why you actually have no liability. In other words, you're not the one supposed to pay the bills. And I'll explain how that's true and how you can exert that freedom from liability. So please consider attending. I'm sure that the link will be in the comments and below for you to check out. So let's start today's presentation of the top 5 myths, errors, misconceptions in the study of law and freedom. So I'm going to put up this little presentation here. Let's see what's the best way to do this. Let's try. That's not the one I meant to do. All right. We'll stick with this one for now. Okay, so the first myth, misconception, error is I am a sovereign citizen. Now, I know this may be introductory material for many of you, but I just want to go through this clearly because many people use this term very inappropriately. So let's look at the definition of these words, sovereign and citizen, from Black's Law 9th edition. And this is, as I explained previously when I talked about resources for study of the law, this is readily available on the Internet Archive, archive.org. And in the highlighted portion, I'll read the definition of sovereign: a person, body, or state vested with independent and supreme authority. And number 2, the ruler of an independent state. So I don't think that we are vested with supreme authority over others. So I wouldn't describe myself as a sovereign, which is usually referring to like the king or the head of state. And if we look further at the definition of citizen, we see that a citizen is defined as a person who, by either birth or naturalization, is a member of a political community, a member, right? Not the one with supreme authority, owing allegiance to the community and being entitled to enjoy all its civil rights and protections. So the allegiance part actually shows that citizens are the subjects of the sovereign and the sovereign rules over the citizens. So you cannot be both parties at the same time. It is a contradiction in terms. Now, when we talk about law with others, especially people who have some knowledge of law, like perhaps attorneys, politicians, police officers, etc., they might use the term sovereign citizen to refer to us, but that's a pejorative term. It's basically saying that we are difficult to deal with, or may even have connotations that we might be right-wing extremists or something like that. So it's important that we don't perpetuate this, and that if anyone refers to us in this respect that we clarify things, because since it's an inherent contradiction in terms, it certainly degrades our appearance of competence with respect to our legal knowledge. So it would be great for me if I never heard that term again. All right, on to number 4. Number 4, the birth certificate is a negotiable instrument. It certainly is not. And I'm not sure where this originally came from, but there are many people who think that the birth certificate is like a stock certificate, that it represents some kind of ownership of assets or a negotiable instrument of sorts. So here is an example of the New York long form birth certificate, and this is not mine, but it is redacted, and it matches what mine looks like exactly. And you can see at the top it says certificate of birth. There is a certificate number. There is a serial number and a barcode on the bottom. There is a seal. There is a signature of the registrar. There's a signature. I think that's the only signature on there. Okay, so this is a birth certificate. So let's see what a certificate actually is and what a negotiable instrument is. So first, let's look at the definition of a negotiable instrument, and this is from the Uniform Commercial Code, which governs this area, and it's the same definition that would be in federal and state law. And in the highlighted portion, negotiable instrument means an unconditional promise or order to pay a fixed amount of money with or without interest or other charges described in the promise or order. And there are some other conditions, but they're not really important for this discussion. So in other words, it's either an unconditional promise to pay or an unconditional order to pay. Now, if we look back at this birth certificate, do we see any writing on here that promises or orders to pay a fixed amount? We do not. Okay, so let's look at the definition here of a certificate. And once again, we refer to Black's Law 9th edition. And I'll read, number 1, a document in which a fact is formally attested. Okay, notice that's quite distinct from a negotiable instrument or a security or anything representing finance. It is simply a fact is formally attested. And the birth certificate, we know that what is the fact that's formally attested? It is the birth. And we can finally look at the definition of birth certificate, specifically in Black's Law, which states a formal document that records or attests to a person's birth date, birthplace, and parentage. Notice there's nothing in that definition about any value or negotiation or commercial interest. So a birth certificate simply attests to a fact, the facts related to the birth of an individual, the birthplace of an individual, the date of the birth, and the parentage. Okay, it is not a negotiable instrument. Now, in my workshop this weekend, I will talk more about exactly what the birth certificate may attest to, and why it's held by the state and how it relates to our role in the legal system. But it is not something that you can take to a broker and exchange or deposit in a brokerage account. Okay, excellent. We are flying through this. So let's now go to number 3, which is the answer to living freely is living completely in the private. And here is a book written with instructions to achieve that. But I would say that if it's even possible to accomplish this, that you would end up living like a hermit, but very destitute. So let's talk a little bit about public versus private, because commerce is part of the public. Now, you can exchange goods and services with another man or woman in the private outside of commerce, but it can't involve commerce to do so and remain in the private. So let's learn a little bit about what commerce is. And let me also just point you to the U.S. Constitution. I believe this is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, which states Congress has the power, quote, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. Now, the among the several states is something that is defined in case law, and you can look into that matter, and it has evolved in the definition over time, but it's construed quite broadly as anything that involves more than one state, essentially. But what is not stated there is that whatever the United States Congress or does not regulate with respect to commerce may be regulated by the individual states. You know, New York, Maryland, Ohio, California, they have the authority legally to regulate any commerce that is not among the several states or with foreign nations. So the government has the ability or the authority granted to it in the Constitution to regulate commerce. So what is commerce? According to Black's Law, we have again here, commerce is the exchange of goods and services. Now, it doesn't specify if it's between private parties or public parties. Here, it's really talking about any exchange of goods and services. Now, it says, especially on a large scale involving transportation between cities, states, and nations, but that's not a condition of commerce. That is just an emphasis of the word. So any trading of goods and services involves commerce. Now, if we look at the definition of commercial law, the substantive law dealing with the sale and distribution of goods, the financing of credit transactions on the security of the goods sold, and negotiable instruments, as we previously alluded to. So anytime you're selling, distributing, financing using credit or using instruments, and by the way, cash or US dollars are negotiable instruments. Checks, even personal checks, are also negotiable instruments. So any transactions involving those aspects fall under commercial law, i.e. the Commerce Clause, i.e. the government's power to regulate commerce. So if we are to live fully in the private, we cannot participate in commerce at all. So even if we are allowed to engage in private transactions with other private men or women, we cannot use cash. We cannot use minted precious metal coins. We could use precious metals, probably. We could use other types of barter, but we can't engage in the system of commerce to remain in the private. And you can see how living that way will be a real impediment to doing anything. Furthermore, many people are under the impression that if you simply take your property that you acquired through commerce in the public and place it into a private trust, that takes it completely out of commerce. But that is actually not the case. So if you look at, for example, the lien laws in particular states, if you have a lien on property that you obtained in commerce, like let's say a personal car loan or a vehicle loan, right, that if you default, they could repossess the car. So they have a lien on the vehicle. Now, if you take that car, that property, and place it into a private trust, that lien is still valid according to state law. So you don't really get the level of protection. You can't just take something that's in the public acquired through commerce and just convert it into the private. It has to be in the private from the beginning. So it really would be difficult to live life completely in the private. All right, let's move on to, I think are we next at, yes, number two. Number two, a private membership association, or PMA, is the correct term for a private association. Okay, so I thought this was the case, and it seemed that during the pandemic years, there were many, many people. It was almost like a trendy activity to convert your business to a quote unquote PMA in order to avoid some of the COVID mandates and regulations for public corporations. Now, I went and looked up on Google Scholar, where you can search case law. So for court cases from any jurisdiction, you can focus on certain jurisdictions, but I did this for all jurisdictions, all dates. And I searched for case law related to private membership associations. And I put it in quotes so that exact term would come up. So it wouldn't have, private and then a bunch of other words and then association. And this yielded only 21 cases. And I went back and traced the earliest date of those cases, and it was not until 2010. So our legal system in this nation, it was completely unaware of the term private membership association until 2010. And since that time, there have only been 21 cases where that has been involved at all. Now, here's an other interesting aspect. There's no Wikipedia entry for PMAs. So what is the actual term? Because private associations have been in existence in our nation for a long, long time. And many of the common organizations or associations that we're familiar with, such as the American Bar Association, the American Medical Association, the NAACP, and many others, are private associations, but they are not PMAs because they existed long before the term PMA came into our awareness. And they are known as unincorporated associations. And this term, there is a Wikipedia entry that's quite extensive. And when I searched on Google Scholar case law for this term, you can see there were 15,900 cases that came back on the search. And this goes all the way back to the year 1781. So in the very early history of the United States. So this is the proper term for a private association. And if you are interested in having a business that it operates in the private, and there are some conditions for that, it would be called an unincorporated association, correctly, not a PMA. Now, one of the main aspects of a private association is that it cannot be for the goal of making profit. So the revenue that comes in from it, if there is revenue, right, cannot be considered profit or utilized as profit. Now, you can generate revenue and it can be used for things. It has to be used for, the benefit of the members of the association. And that could be a number of things. It could be to, do a project that would benefit the members, but it can also pay for the salaries of people who perform functions in the association for the benefit of the members. So if those conditions fit with your idea for an association, then an unincorporated association may be an avenue that is appropriate. All right, now we are down to the number one myth, error, or misconception in the modern law and freedom movement, which is, I don't need a driver's license, registration, or insurance to drive my private automobile for traveling or other purposes. So this is a sticky one because there are many, many people who talk about this. And there are many, many different ideas and discussions about what's actually in the law. And a lot of this is based on the definitions of a motor vehicle that, according to some jurisdictions, or at least in the past, possibly in the present, the definition of a motor vehicle may be a car that's only used, that's used in commerce or for some commercial purpose. Now, we talked a little bit about what commerce is, so I wanted you to think very carefully, if when you operate your automobile, are you participating in commerce? But I thought I'd look at some definitions here, and I'm going to use New York state law because I am living in New York. And you can look on your own state law or the law in your country, if you're not in the United States, governing this, and find what it says about these issues there. So here we have, from the Vehicle and Traffic Law in New York, Section 125, the definition of motor vehicles. And it states here, every vehicle operated or driven upon a public highway which is propelled by any power other than muscular power. So if it's electric, if it's gasoline, if it's hydrogen powered, if it's nuclear, or any other, or solar, any other type of power other than your own arms and feet, like a bicycle, for example, then it is a motor vehicle. Now, there is an exception for, basically wheelchairs, electric wheelchairs, and trains and snowmobiles, as well as some all-terrain vehicles and electric bicycles, okay, which are all slow-moving vehicles. But you can see that every car, SUV, pickup truck that you might operate, if you drive on a public highway, which is virtually any road, then you're driving a motor vehicle. Now, I did also get the definition of vehicle. I didn't put it in the right order here, but I just want to show you that a vehicle is every device in, upon, or by which any person or property is or may be transported or drawn upon a highway, except devices moved by human power or used exclusively upon stationary rails or tracks. So not trains and not bicycles. Okay. But you can see it's every device. So that, doesn't separate an automobile from that. So to continue with some of the important definitions that are used in the laws, I wanted to give you the definition of driver. And because you might say, an operator or some other different word, but here a driver, which is, used for driver license, it is defined as every person who operates or drives or is in actual physical control of a vehicle. Okay, so you see that is inclusive of everything you do. Now, person, by the way, just so you know, is defined as a natural person in this law. So it's not referring to a legal fiction, although it may also refer to a legal fiction in many contexts. All right, so let's continue to look at the New York state law. So let's look at the requirement for registration. Okay, it says here, no motor vehicle shall be operated or driven upon the public highways of this state without first being registered in accordance with the provisions of this article. So we could see that the cars we drive do qualify as motor vehicles. We are drivers and we're operating on the public highways. So therefore, because of New York's power and authority to regulate commerce, we have to register the vehicle. And this is providing the authority for this. It says, except as otherwise expressly provided in this chapter, this title shall be exclusively controlling upon the licensing and regulation of drivers. Remember, the power or authority to regulate commerce. They're regulating drivers. We meet the definition of driver, and on their use of public highways, which, as I said, is virtually every road. So if we, have a car, let's say, that we built from spare parts, and we only operate it on our own private property, then we don't need a driver's license, registration, or insurance. But as soon as we take that out on the public highways, and by the way, it doesn't even specify if the vehicle is purchased through commerce or privately acquired, like that someone built it from spare parts, in their yard. For example, it seems to cover all vehicles if they are on public highways and driven by drivers. So in my opinion, and based on the law that I've presented here, we do have to get a driver's license. And let me just make one final comment about that, because, think about the common things that we do with our car. Now, occasionally we might, just give someone a ride or transport ourselves, from our house to a friend's house for purely social engagements. But if we, stop along the way to put some fuel in our car and pay for that fuel either with cash or a check, which are negotiable instruments, or with a credit, then we are in commerce and we are using our vehicle for commercial purposes, technically. So I don't think we can really separate, and we should just get a driver's license, register your car, get insurance, although you may be able to self-insure if you look at the requirements in your state, and then you'll be fined. I don't think it's worthwhile to go through all this trouble and then get in long debates with police officers during a traffic stop, or be pulled over all the time for not having a license plate on your car. There are ways to deal with any infractions like tickets and such, and I will talk about that at the workshop on Friday. But that is a much easier thing to deal with than having to have it out with a officer at the side of the road, especially when they are in a situation where they don't know you and they have to consider that at any time you could pull out a firearm and start shooting at them, because that actually does happen to officers on the highway. So I think it's better to have the right documents, cooperate, and then deal with it after the fact, and realize that you don't have the liability to pay with with your own labor, and be in indebted servitude. All right. Well, I hope that clears up some common myths, errors, and misconceptions that you all may have been exposed to. And I would venture to guess that there might be a few questions to clarify some of these points. So we'll have the opportunity to answer a couple of them now, if Alexander wants to send them my way. What is the purpose of the MCO? So that is, I believe you're referring to the manufacturer's certificate of origin, and that confers the ownership of the vehicle. It is the main title of the vehicle, rather than a certificate of title, which you might receive. When you buy a vehicle and register it in your state's motor vehicles, which is generally done at the right at the dealership, the dealer sends the manufacturer's certificate of origin to the DMV. So the DMV actually holds the title to the vehicle, and that, of course, places it in commerce, and part of the reason. It is possible to obtain the MCO directly and not register the vehicle from the dealer. They may give you a hard time about this. The main reason someone would do that is if they were planning to export the vehicle to a foreign country, and that may be a consideration. But most of us will never see the MCO for any vehicles because they will go directly to the Department of Motor Vehicles in our state. All right, the next question from Y2 Kazan. Dr. Kaufman, what about case laws such as Thompson v. Smith and many other ones that conclude we have the right to travel by automobile without forced insurance registration or a driver's license? I have completely unaware of that case, but I certainly will take a look at it and see what it says and report back to you. All right, Chef Dev, how do you feel about private DOT plates? So I don't really have any feelings one way or the other, but I would just look for what is the evidence of the outcome. So this goes for, using a passport to identify yourself during a traffic stop if you don't have a license. Getting Department of Transportation plates, and that's, from Federal Department of Transportation. I would look for objective evidence that by using these strategies, you can essentially travel unencumbered. If you look on the US passport, on the opening front matter before it gets to your ID page, there is an appeal from the Secretary of State that says to let the bearer of this passport travel unencumbered freely. So we, certainly do have that right, and I feel that it is mostly respected. So, just see what people have done this and what actual outcomes do they have. Do they get pulled over all the time? Do they never get pulled over? What happens if they are speeding and get pulled over? These types of things. All right, next question. Thinking loud. The problem I see with this law of commerce, you're continuously reference the definition of those words tends to change frequently. How do you address this? Well, certainly definitions do change, and which is why there are different versions of dictionaries, for example, and laws get repealed, new laws become enacted, and this may change, and it can be very, very confusing. So there are a couple of standards here to think of. So one is that many laws, statutes, ordinances, regulations have internal definitions, as do contracts. So with respect to a given law, the definitions within that law itself are the ones that are presiding. So first of all, like I did with the motor vehicle laws, for example, I looked at the definitions right in those laws to understand what was going on. I didn't go to the law dictionary. So with respect to a court case, for example, or a current legal matter, the definitions within the law are always going to take precedence. Now, there is also a principle, and I'm not sure what it's called, but that when a litigant is in a case, the law that they are familiar with, as long as they can cite a legitimate reference, even if it's an older law, can be used to adjudicate the case. So if you're using a definition from Black's Law 6th edition or 9th edition, which are both older editions, that can still be upheld in a court of law, but there are no guarantees. So this is an issue that you may have to actually argue about in order to ascertain which definition is correct. Now, the other way to look at this in the context of litigation is that during discovery, you have the opportunity to request information from the other party. And there may be key words in the lawsuit that there are multiple definitions. So you can actually ask them to give the formal definitions of these words so that that would basically be presiding in that particular lawsuit. So I hope that clarifies some of the ambiguity about various definitions. All right, another question from Sewing Class with Sarah Cross. How does this work with medical debt law, or are you just addressing traffic? Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking with this, but certainly the definitions that I talked about with respect to traffic law and the requirement for registration or a driver's license would be in the motor vehicle law, which would be separate, from and there's not a section of law referred to as medical debt law. There is consumer credit law, which is most likely what you would fall under. And then there is separate law related to healthcare, like health information, governing health, private health information, for example, or other things like that. So, you always need to look in the specific area of the law to find out. But the practice of medicine is still under commerce, which is why there's requirements and regulation for licensure, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So it is very similar in that respect. All right. Is registration change of ownership? That is an interesting question, and I would need to look into that a little bit more, the exact meaning of registration and a change of ownership. So, thinking about registering a motor vehicle, the transaction itself to purchase the vehicle will result in a change of ownership, but I think it's a little bit less clear who it's changing from. So it may be actually that you never really own the vehicle in the first place. And there's also the fact that, there's not just one ownership, just like a title is a bundle of rights to property, but though there could be different aspects of the title, like different rights to the property that may be divided among owners. And these things include mortgages, liens, et cetera, that can affect ownership. But the registration definitely assures that the vehicle is in commerce as regulated by the state that it's registered in. All right, I think I can take one more question if there are any more. And while I'm waiting to see if there are any more questions, I'll also just remind everyone that many of these issues will be cleared up on my workshop this Saturday. It's Not Your Duty to Pay, where you'll see how once you understand your real role, that you're not going to have liability to pay for these things. So it's not going to be the same kind of burden to maintain licensure, insurance, and such in order to be subject to this regulation once you understand whose responsibility it really is to pay. All right, so we'll have one more question from Michael B. What is your understanding of the meaning of person, and which dictionary, if any, do you use to define that meaning? Well, person is a little bit broad because it can refer to a number of entities. And we often, in lay language, we think person means a human being, and that would be known as a natural person in the law. And many times the word person does refer to a natural person. So if the word person is in a particular law, for example, you need to look in that law, and it usually does indicate what person is referring to in that context. So it can refer to a natural person. So I didn't put this area in the motor vehicle law, but I did find where it said that a person refers to a human being or a natural person with respect to that particular law. But person can also refer to various types of corporate fictions, like a corporation, a trust, and other types of entities which can be defined for different purposes in different laws. And also, if you look up person in Black's Law Dictionary, you're going to see the main entry, but then you're going to see many, many other definitions, like natural person will be in there, and many other kinds of persons. And you might have heard of the term corporate personhood, because there are certain constitutional protections that corporations have that are similar to individual men and women because of this legal philosophy of corporate personhood. So I hope that clears things up a bit. It can be very, very confusing to study the law because, one of many points of confusion is this issue with varying and multiple definitions of particular words, and words in law having a very different meaning than they do in plain English. So hopefully I gave you some tips on how to reconcile in a particular circumstance which definition is actually the most appropriate or presiding. All right, well, it's been another Healthy Living live stream. Please take a look at the upcoming workshop. It's not your duty to pay, and I look forward to seeing everyone back, as always, next Wednesday for another Healthy Living live stream. Until then, goodbye, everyone.